How do you create a silent home podcast studio this year? I mean, when you are contemplating a career as a podcaster, you have all kinds of options. You can do things from home. You can actually do things from a facility that you actually rent or lease. You can also go to a friend's basement. You have all kinds of possibilities. So, but if you want to create a silent home podcast studio, here's a strategy I want you to think about. You got to really understand the segregation or the difference, if you will, between soundproofing and sound treatment. Those are two important concepts that you need to really master if you are going to create a silent home podcast studio. So let me first talk to you about soundproofing, and then I'll explain to you what sound treatment really means. So to soundproof a room means that you are isolating it from any unwanted external noise elsewhere in the building. So you are actually isolating the room from any unnecessary and unwanted external noise. And so there is actually a misconception that by putting up some foam acoustic tiles on a wall, you are soundproofing the room. That's just so it's not how thing happens. Okay, that's not going to have any impact on noise bleeding through from outside. Okay, and so that's for soundproofing. What about sound treatment? Well, to sound treat a room means that you are going to improve the audio quality within that room. So you might want to actually do a couple of things, but that's an important element to think about the how the audio comes out, not just how your voice comes out, but how the echo, how the background, all those things are important. Okay, so in today's conversation, what I want to do here is that I want to really explain to you the fact that if you are going to a soundproof versus a sound treat any room, your home podcast studio, or and by the way, this could be your basement, this could be your living room, this could be your bedroom. It really depends on the best area in your house. But yeah, if you are going to create a silent home podcast studio, you want to really understand how soundproofing can actually have an impact on your audience, and how sound treatment will also impact your audience. Because see, as podcasters, you're not just talking, you are giving value to your audience. So think about your audience first. When you think about creating a silent home podcast studio, you got to really understand also, so besides the difference between soundproofing and sound treatment, you got to really understand also acoustics and reverb. And this is because those two elements are very important, especially in the long run when you have to scale your podcast. So buying a top of the range podcast microphone or premium podcasting gear is all well and good. Don't get me wrong, but the thing is, if you are recording your show in a bathtub, it's still going to sound bad. I mean, no matter what, I don't care how great your voice is, or I don't care how how wonderful the echo is. No, you want to think about acoustics and reverb. Now, you want to focus on the sound quality of the space and choose a space to find characteristics of a recording studio instead of a squash court. It's one of those things where you have to really ask yourself, again, going back to what I said about your target audience. Does your audience love the kind of noise, not noise, but the kind of echo that's coming out of your podcast? Does your audience really even care? Because some audiences don't really care. I mean, if your audience cares about the content versus the quality, quote unquote, the quality around the content, then you have to really adapt to whatever your audience wants. One thing I want to say here is that excessive reverb or echo on your voice can make your show sound like amateurish. A room with a lot of hard and bare surfaces will have your voice bouncing around like a pinball machine, and you do not want to have that. This is something that you really want to think about, especially because remember that your listeners are dedicating 30 minutes of their time to you, 1 hour of their time to you. All you can do is just give them at least decent quality. Okay. And one thing I want to say also is that when you have a room with a lot of soft and furnished surfaces, this sort of facility will prevent excessive reverb or echo. Think of the way your voice sounds in the bathroom. compared to in the bedroom. So finding the best sounding room or a podcasting space in your house is actually a great starting point to actually make sure that you have a good podcast like name or brand, if you will, right? When you are actually thinking about adding value. And by the way, if you own a duvet, you already have a home podcast studio because the quality of the sound will be a lot better. So when you think about creating a silent home podcast studio, that sounds great. Sometimes you might have to improvise your home podcast studio. I mean, if you have the resources, you can actually have a designer come and just do something very fancy, whatever. Yeah, but if for any reason you are a neophyte, you are a starter, and you want to really get going real fast, sometimes you can really see a lot of value in improvising. So there are numerous reasons why you might not be able to create your own dedicated podcast room or podcast home studio, right? And it could be a financial resources. It can be logistical resources. It can be the technology. Maybe you don't have the appropriate technology. So whether you share the house with your family or flatmates, or you simply don't have the space or technology or money, a permanent setup is not an option for everyone. That's for sure, especially when you're just starting. I mean, if you're just starting, you have other preoccupations than actually having a wonderful home podcast studio. So you have actually a couple of options. You can use a pre-existing area, or you can do a localized treatment process. Let me break it down for you. So when I speak about using a pre-existing area, this might simply be the best sounding, softest furnished room in your house, or it might be a walk-in wardrobe full of hanging clothes. So anything to cut down on ambient noise, you want to really pay attention to that. What about localized treatment? Well, instead of worrying about the sound of the room as a whole, you can create a small studio around yourself and your audio equipment, right? So it's all about convenience. It's all about scalability. It's all about efficiency. And here you can pop your mic into a cat bed or surround it with pillows, for instance. Or you can actually drape a duvet over a clothes rack and get inside it with your microphone. So this is actually and this works really really well as well. Now, granted, with this setups, you might look a bit silly when you are recording, but remember, we are working in audio, okay? So whatever setup you put together, though, just make sure it's comfortable enough to actually record a full podcast episode with. And high quality audio is one thing. Being able to work the next day is another, right? So if you're thinking about creating a silent home podcast studio, that sounds great. You might be actually contemplating semi-permanent setups as well. Because you can try to have a permanent setups or even temporary setups, but if those two options are not really working for you, you can try something hybrid, right? Something in between. So, and this could be a semi-permanent setup. So if you've got a bit more room in your house, what happens here is that you have a flexibility, and you can actually set up a home podcast studio that can still be used for other non-audio related purposes. It's all about seeing what works for you, what kind of spaces you have. And you can buy or make sound treated baffling boards or partitions on stands. And this can be set up to form a mini dead room around your recording area. And even better, this can be tidied away afterwards, though you still need a reasonable amount of room to store them though. So this is actually what I was telling a little earlier about the logistical aspect of you trying to have like do things yourself, like the DIY approach, right? And another option when we speak about DIY, and another option is that you want to use acoustic blankets or curtains, which can be hung on rails or hooks, and that gives you more flexibility and more autonomy. And so now, though these are easier to tidy away, they are a bit more permanent in the sense that you are probably going to have to attach something to your wall to support them. I'm speaking here about the acoustic blankets or curtains. And so that's an important element. Now, one thing I want to say is that when it comes to flexibility, you got to really ask yourself, how do I add value to my audience, right? If you remember a little earlier, I told you that you want to actually be able to walk the next day, no matter what you have, whether it is permanent or semi-permanent or temporary. You want to be able to walk the next day. You have like your health first, your sanity first, your well-being first, because of course you are trying to add value to your audience. That's for sure. They are the reason why you are living and breathing for your podcast. But at the end of the day, you have to actually like the whole process has to make sense for you as well, and it has to be an enjoyable journey also. So when you think about setups, you have semi-permanent setups, but what about the permanent setups? I mean, there is a possibility for you to do things on a permanent basis. Of course, if you have the resources, right? And so if you do have the luxury of commandeering a spare room or walk-in cupboard, then life immediately becomes a whole lot easier. This is one of those things where you got to really ask yourself what works or what doesn't work for me. But hey, listen, if you are in a neighborhood, or you live in an apartment, or you live in a house that has those kinds of capabilities, then you are really, really lucky. So for instance, you can convert a walk-in cupboard in your house into a home studio vocal booth, and so this is kind of cool. And you can actually use all kinds of capabilities. For instance, acoustic foam tiles. Okay, and you can actually think about maybe you can think about having a specialist adhesive. You can have glue. You can have a Velcro tape. I mean, it really depends on what kind of resources you have, right? So a permanent setup could be a big possibility for you. But even though based on our investigations, it's just a lot better to go with a permanent setup if you already have a pretty established podcast. In other words, if your podcast is really like struggling to gain traction right now, you do not want to do anything permanent. No, you want to start small. You want to really you want to do trials and errors. You want to see what works, what doesn't work, and then you can scale. You can double down, triple down, quadruple down on what works. Okay. And so if you want to do a permanent setup, make sure you already have an audience and you have a community. See, it's not just about the audience; it's about the community. In other words, you can monetize a community, right? You can actually you can transition your audience from, say, YouTube to another platform. But if you don't have a community, you cannot monetize that. You already have people who are you just have people who are listening to your show, okay? But if you want to really make sure you can monetize that audience, you have to transform that audience in a community, and you can only have that sort of a community aspect of things by having permanent setups. Now, not permanent setups in terms of a fixture in your house. Permanent setup can be a setup in terms of the content you publish, in terms of the frequency you publish, in terms of the logistics around your podcast, right? Those are important elements to think about. Let me talk to you about soundproofing a room here. So, see, when you think about creating a silent home podcast studio that sounds great, you got to really understand that there are some external as well as internal noise considerations for your home podcast studio. Because the thing is that, when you actually are talking into a mic, your audience is hearing everything that you may not hear. So here are some considerations that when you have to think about, especially if you aim to make your home podcast studio silent from unwanted noise. Are any of the walls of the room external or joined to your neighbor's house, for instance? And does your neighbor tend to play the drums, watch TV at a high volume, or have a dog that never stops barking? Those are elements. Those are things that you can't control. And is there a window in the room? Because when you think about window, you got to think about wind. You got to think about like if it's raining or if there's a plane flying above. If you're next to an airport, like an airport, those are elements to think about. And so if there's a window in the room, does it back onto a busy street with lots of noise outside? Does the room have anything in it that might make noise? Okay, by this I mean anything that can be moved, right? A boiler, a gas matter, a gas matter that actually clicks sporadically, that sort of things that you can't really control, but that has a big impact on the audio quality of your podcast. Also, you can think about, are you recording near an AC unit or even a loud fridge? You can turn a fridge off, but it's almost certain that you'll forget to turn it back on, right? So it's one of those things where you have to really ask yourself, do I want to do things permanently, or temporarily? Even when it comes to external or internal noise considerations. Because see, the thing is that if the bulk of unwanted noise comes from outside, then you might actually get away with blocking up the window. But if the building has paper-thin walls that bleed sound, then you probably will be better off just recording in your car or even outside. Oh yeah, you'll be really surprised that you have podcasters actually recording in their car. And that's really possible. Of course, you got to have a certain quality of cars too. If you have the right car, then you are good to go. That's really possible. So if you're thinking about creating a silent home podcast studio, that sounds great. Do not forget the sound quality basics of a home studio, right? It's one of those things where this is stuff that you actually control. When I spoke a little earlier about external and internal noise considerations, those you do not necessarily control, but the sound quality basics you do control. So you want to use a quality microphone, and you want to buy or make a pop filter for your microphone. You want to have headphones, right? You want to choose a software package that works best for you, because you got to really understand that a software package will actually polish up the audio quality. Okay, so when I speak about using a quality microphone, you got to really understand that ultimately the input you use affects the output you get. So whether it is a USB microphone or an XLR mic, don't forget to have a quality microphone. No one likes going deaf from exuberant plosives, so you want to buy or make a pop filter for your microphone. And headphones are an absolute must-have. Quality here is less important, but you'll find that headphone comfort for your longer recordings is kind of key. That's an important element, especially if you are thinking about scaling down the road, right? It's not about quality in the short run. It's about quality in the long run. So when you think about creating a silent home podcast studio, that sounds great. You want to think about the things that you can control and the things you cannot control. And when it comes to things you cannot control, you got to really ask yourself, what is the impact of my audio quality vis-a-vis my audience? Do they like it? Do they care? If they care, then I really have to do something to really fix it. If they don't care, what can I do to actually improve the audio quality for them? When you actually think about having a podcast, whether you are podcasting, you are recording from home, or you're recording from a dedicated facility, it's less about the podcast itself, the content you are sharing, than the relationship you are able to forge over the years, over the months, over the weeks with your audience. This goes back to what I said a little earlier about having a community, right? Not just a bunch of listeners. You want to have a community who will actually swear by your podcast. Because when you have a community, once again, I want to insist and finish on that, you are able to monetize your podcast through several avenues. So you have, in essence, several avenues for revenue, and that's what you want. So here's a recap to this conversation. I spoke to you about how to create a silent home podcast studio that sounds great. I gave you the strategy. We spoke about soundproofing, sound treatment, acoustics, reverb. We spoke about the semi-permanent versus permanent setups. We talked about the soundproofing a room, and we spoke also about the sound quality basics of a home podcast studio. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.